past couple of days, I've been thinking a lot lately about woke versus anti-woke content. And I kind of realized that there's a lot of games that have come out recently that are completely 100% free of any woke elements whatsoever. So today I wanted to take a moment to highlight some of them and talk about them and give them the praise that they deserve. These are top 10 games on Nintendo Switch that are completely free of woke content. To start off the list, we have Castlevania Dominus Collection, and I suppose you can also throw in the Anniversary Collection and the Advanced Collection as well. These are, of course, re-releases of older Castlevania games from the 80s, from the 2000s, and all of them all of them are top-notch, old-school platforming goodness. The Egavanias in particular, especially those in the Dominus collection, have really capable, competent, just great characters that really build the universe and setting in really organic, fun ways, right? All of them play wildly differently from each other. All the bosses are completely different, right? It would be easy to simply look at these games and think they're just rehashes of each other, but in actuality, all of them are very original, great, top of the line action RPGs. I said this when I was playing through all of them, but every single one of these games is better than anything FromSlop has ever put out. And games like Order of Ecclesia may very well be in the top bracket of Castlevania games ever, right? You know, I love Shanoa as a character. I love the ending, but what really makes the game so devoutly anti-woke is its commitment to accurately depicting the battle of good versus evil, right? This series has no qualms about what it is, right? It is objectively good people, whether it's Simon or Soma or Shanoa going out to kill Dracula. And the battle never ends, but it has to be done anyway. And to me, this really is a hallmark to traditional morality and is a really good place to start if you're looking into getting into some lesser known classic video games. There are a lot of great strategy games on Nintendo Switch, most prominently the Fire Emblem games, but I think the one that manages to emphasize anti woke content the best is probably Unicorn Overlord, right? This series really relishes in having a bunch of attractive characters going up against the evil Zenorian Empire in this strategy RPG inspired by Fire Emblem and Ogre Battle. This game really does feel very old school in its design and its presentation, but it's very modern in its gameplay and like the sheer amount of utility you can use in putting together your units together and having them execute their commands. There is a lot of depth in this game, and I really never get tired of it. You can argue that the story is a little bit lackluster and that they could have done more with it, but the art and the presentation are gorgeous and is well worth the price of admission alone. And the gameplay, when you understand the story beats and understand like how to recruit everyone and no longer have to pay attention to the admittedly kind of boring cutscenes, it is very, very entertaining to the point where I honestly feel like I'll never really stop playing this game. There's always something more to learn and to do and to accomplish, and it is absolutely one of this year's standout titles. I already told people I was going to do this, but there is no denying that Bayonetta 3 very well may be the most anti-woke game in existence, because this release completely undermines the woke Marxist agenda. The idea that women don't need men, and that women can do whatever they want, and that they're strong, and they're powerful, and they can do anything, right? Bayonetta 3 accomplishes those genuine virtues, right, of women being strong, capable, intelligent, sexy, while turning it on its head, right? Because although Bayonetta is a strong, competent female character, she does still fall in love and start a family with a man, which goes completely against the Marxist ideology. Because as you all should know by now, the primary function of feminism and homosexuality and Marxism as a whole is an attempt at population control. Trying to get undesirable people to not breed and control the population, to allocate resources to the wealthy and powerful. Like again, this is all known if you pay attention. But Bayonetta 3 really demonstrates in no uncertain terms how important it is to find love and start a family. And one of the really cool things about it is that Viola, the character Viola, looks like she would be the stereotypical woke character. And this is something I acknowledged when I first saw the trailer. The character looks like a woke stereotype. But the reason it doesn't work is because Viola genuinely loves both of her parents, right? Bayonetta and Luca. She is essentially like a goofy tomboy going off on her first adventure, right? And that makes her so much more likable than someone like Rey from Star Wars, for example, who just kind of knows how the Millennium Falcon works without having to be told. Like she knows how it works better than Han, right? When you compare that to Viola, who's a bit of an amateur Umber Witch, right? Who doesn't have the anywhere near the experience or skill of Bayonetta has, like she comes off more plucky and engaging and just fun. I always think back to that moment, in that chapter where like she and Bayonetta beat a monster together and she comes over like wanting a high five, and it just makes her so likable and so engaging. And this is a character that does have a very unorthodox design, right? Lots of people complained about it when they first saw it, but at her actual core, Viola is a very likable character. And I think that's a big thing about Bayonetta 3 that really needs to be addressed is at its core, it is an excellent video game. You really need to like start ignoring these YouTube grifters and these shills and these weird like Twitter posters. I saw some guy on X a while back, learning the law, I think, like try and compare Rachel from Ninja Gaiden Black to Viola as if like that's actually a reasonable comparison to make. They're completely different characters and they do completely different things, right? How dare Platinum Games have like, more of a punk design for one of their female leads. It's just, to me, Bayonetta 3 really encompasses everything great about Bayonetta. And I do think like the constant never-ending downplaying of it is purely rooted in woke ideology. To me, Bayonetta 3 is absolutely one of the most anti-woke games produced recently. I feel like I would be remiss to talk about Bayonetta and not bring up her spunky younger sister, Juliet, from Lollipop Chainsaw, who's essentially kind of a more high school level Bayonetta, right? She's a cheerleader fighting zombies. It's simplistic. It's not at no, it's not anywhere near the same level of quality as Bayonetta. This is somewhat of a lesser game, but people really enjoy it for what it is. And I do kind of wish we would continue getting these lower budget beat 'em up style games, right? Like this is the kind of thing we need to see more of, is just lower budget, just out there wild games made for like specific demographics. And I found myself really surprised seeing how many people like really enjoyed Lollipop Chainsaw. Not just men fetishizing the character, but women who get to really appreciate a really fun, well-written, interesting female lead. And one of the things that makes Juliet a little bit different than most female protagonists is that although she is strong and capable, right? She also has like lots of really odd critical flaws to her. Ones that really make certain aspects of the game really interesting. Specifically, the fact that this game makes the really strange decision of objectifying the male lead. This is kind of the thing about Lollipop Chainsaw that kind of makes it more than a parody and really gives it quite a bit of depth, is that Juliet, although she deeply loves him, does not seem to think of Nick as her equal at all, right? Like he sacrifices himself to save her from a zombie, and she cuts his head off, and he's miserable the entire game, right? But she's constantly trying to like cheer him up and talk about like all the great things he can do as a head, and it's just ridiculous. it's tongue in cheek, but you really get this sense that Juliet doesn't really have the emotional capacity to understand what Nick is going through, right? In a way, she doesn't respect him. And it's this really interesting subversion of this kind of relationship dynamic that makes Lollipop Chainsaw so interesting, because we often hear from feminists about how like men objectify women in games, and like female leads just kind of exist to be sidekicks for male characters, and then you get Lollipop Chainsaw, which does the opposite, and it manages to make it very interesting and compelling, right? These Nick remains a really interesting character because he's objectified, because of the way Juliet treats him. It gives depth and credibility to both characters, right? Again, this kind of goes into what I mean when I talk about how feminists evaluate media, because you're not allowed to be misogynistic. Characters aren't allowed to have opinions or worldviews or differ from any way outside of the ideology. And I think Julia is a really good example of someone who's clearly a deeply flawed human being, but still has a lot of genuine heart and passion about who she is and what she does. And to the point where I honestly would really like to see a sequel that follows up on these ideas. But I really doubt we're gonna get one. But if we did, it probably wouldn't be all that anyway. But the fact that I would even like ask for it, like, really says a lot about how this game really manages to surpass itself. Because it easily could be dismissed as a shovelware, like a fan service game, like Onichibara or whatever. But no, it's not. It's a little bit more than that. And the fact that we're still talking about this game 10 years after release really says a lot about it. That this game does have a lot of genuine, passionate fans. If any series does a better job of writing female characters, I would really like to see it, because I do think Ace Attorney, in a lot of ways, has some of the best female characters in gaming. Not just because of their personalities or their designs, but because they're willing to go to pretty extreme lengths to try and depict them in their absolute worst moments, right? You have people getting killed, you have people killing other people, you have all these really cool dynamics. Women are allowed to be actually evil, right? And you get to see real pushback to that. People have realistic reactions to what some of these characters do. And there are real repercussions for this, right? This isn't the kind of series where like a girl does something and nothing happens of it. No, the entire point of it, in a lot of ways, is that you're getting to the bottom of the situation, and you get to know the characters intimately, their positive qualities, their flaws, and you really get the sense that like these characters are real people with real interests, with real backgrounds, with a real history, and a real personality, good and bad, right? Like Ace Attorney does a really good job in demonstrating characters like Franziska von Karma as being like flawed human beings, right? Dahlia Hawthorne as a flawed human being, right? Someone who manipulates other people, uses them, destroys their lives without a care in the world, right? For her own game, right? You have like, it does a really, really good job, like, really depicting female evil in that sense. And that's something that I think Western writers really shy away from. This is kind of a byproduct of woke culture in general, but whenever like a female villain does something, it's always just like, oh, she's misunderstood or she's traumatized, or that doesn't excuse what she's doing though. And I think Ace Attorney really does a better job writing female characters in this sense, where they're not unstoppable superheroes and they're not unstoppable villains. They're just people. And that's what makes it so adamantly anti woke, in that it's not pushing an agenda, it's just treating people as they are. Right? They may be stereotypical, they may act in exaggerated ways, but this series is very consistent with its internal logic, and I really, really appreciate it for that. Princess Peach Showtime has been really overlooked in the greater gamer sphere. So much so that I don't think people are going to really register that this is a major turning point in the Princess Peach character arc in her history, right? This is the moment where she really started establishing herself as a video game icon in her own right, instead of just being like some side character in some Mario game. Like, no, Peach has her own powers, her own abilities, and can carry her own game, right? And this has been known forever, but the thing about Peach Showtime is that a lot of people did not want to admit this game was as good as it was, right? A lot of people wanted to write this off and ignore it and say it didn't matter or that like it wasn't going to amount to anything. But the game really does a good job in emphasizing Peach as a character that can do all sorts of things, much like Mario can, right? She can be a kung fu fighter, she can be a mermaid, she can be a superhero, she can be a swordsman master, she can be a ninja, like she can do anything, right? Like, and again, that is, I think, a really great direction for the character to go in, is to make her a more well-rounded figure instead of just oh, Mario, save me. And this is the thing about Princess Peach is that like up until this release, Peach was pretty consistently the least popular character in the franchise, unless you were a girl who likes princess. Like people didn't like playing as her. They didn't like seeing her. They didn't like her as a character, as a person, right? How many times have you heard those jokes about like, oh, I wonder where Bowser's kids came from? Like, the joke has always been that like is a low key piece of shit, but Princess Peach Showtime kind of shows that's not true, right? Showtime really demonstrates what Peach is like when she's on her own, amusing herself, like going on her own adventure. And it really demonstrates just what makes the character way more interesting than what most people give her credit for. And this is an example of how you should make female characters in games, because she's not just replacing Mario, right? She's not, it's not Super Peach Sisters now, right? Like Peach has her entirely own spin-off title that may or may not get sequels. Again, it remains to be seen. I hope it does, but with all that being said, Princess Peach Showtime is phenomenal and really, really needs to get a lot more attention for what it managed to do for the character and for the world of gaming. It's not a new game, but the original No More Heroes is on the console, and I do think it's worth pointing out because this is, I think, the biggest celebration of nerd culture in an original IP ever, right? This is the story of Travis Touchdown, a guy who goes on an adventure to get laid, right? Throughout his conquest of the UAA, he collects anime figurines and T-shirts as he just gets stronger and stronger, and then ooh, something happens. It's amazing, right? No More Heroes is a fantastic example of just what we've lost over the past 15 years, right? The game is very unapologetic about what it is. It has great voice work, great animations, great combat, a really unique usage of motion controls. The game is a downright masterpiece and probably one of the standout titles on the Wii. If you could get your hands on the Wii version, I would definitely recommend that over the other versions. But No More Heroes is a really, really good example of just how these kind of crass character aspects or this personality or this tone can really work wonders in creating a really vibrant, lively world, right? It feels real compared to like most video game franchises, right? Just in the premise alone, like, oh, why are you doing this? Oh, I want to get laid, right? It's like Super Mario Bros, right? That's the entire point. Like, save the princess so I can get laid, right? It's like a dark twist on that idea. And it's ridiculous. It makes no sense, but that's what they go for. And you just end up being just completely sucked into this rabbit hole of just being excited about the next crazy boss or the next cutscene or like the ending, right? Like, well, what did she mean by this? Like the game just does a wonderful job of giving this really old school feel to a relatively like modern game, right? This is clearly a product of the 2000s, but it really harkens back to just classic titles from the 90s and 80s, right? It really does feel like a game outside of time. And it's really one that I would highly suggest and recommend to anybody who is interested in checking it out. I think one of the most important aspects of dealing with anti woke culture is encouraging critics of it to think critically and to think outside the box, right? It's not enough to simply dismiss claims like targeted towards your favorite franchises, right? You have to like understand exactly what you're dealing with, how to subvert and destroy it, what they're trying to accomplish, their goals, their methodology, like who is involved, who's behind it, right? It's not enough to simply say that like not liking my video game is bad, right? So I encourage improving critical thinking skills and thinking in depth about this kind of thing. Because if you do that even a little bit, the entire communist worldview falls apart, right? And 13 Sentinels, I think, is the best possible example of just how someone's worldview can collapse by absorbing new information. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is a vanillaware title originally released by Vanillaware on PS4, right? This was a PS4 exclusive for a long time before getting a definitive version on Nintendo Switch. The game follows 13 young people as they live their everyday lives during an alien invasion, right? You don't know all that much about the setting or the world to start off with. It just kind of throws you in there. But you know there's a bunch of mechs, you know all 13 people come together to fight the enemy, right? Whoever they are, right? You know some of the characters, but you don't know anything really. Like it takes like 3 hours, I think, to get through like the tutorial sections and start like piecing together all the crazy lore and all the aspects. You know, this character has a relationship with that character, or this character was this, or this character like undergoes like is actually being tortured, right? You have like all this crazy, just convoluted sci-fi nonsense just thrown at your face for 30 whole hours. And it is a wonderful experience, a top tier experience. And it does a really good job, I think, in demonstrating why woke culture doesn't work, or more specifically, why homosexuality doesn't work. It's really, really good at that, and really should be given a lot more praise for how it goes about these topics. But 13 Sentinels is undeniably a based video game. I was sitting here thinking, like, should I put the original Metal Gear Solid on here? Like, I love the game, but is it red pilled enough? And then I thought about it more, and I thought, Metal Gear Solid 1 is a great game, but I think undeniably the more red pilled entry in the Metal Gear series is the vastly inferior Metal Gear Solid 2. So, for the purposes of this list, we're talking about one of the most red pilled games ever made, MGS2, a title that really emphasizes just how the establishment controls the population, how they operate, who they are, how even the people working for them don't understand they're being controlled, how everybody's manipulated, how everything is just a big conspiracy. Okay, MGS2 lays that far out, all out, way more effectively than something stale, contrived, and basic. Something like a Bioshock Infinite. Like, oh, you were just brainwashed the entire time. No, no. MGS2 emphasizes that people are indoctrinated. People are expected to follow orders. People aren't what's the quote? They give context to things that happen in world events, right? So the entire population is led to believe certain things about Shadow Moses or the tanker incident or what happens at the chemical plant, right? Like, again, the Patriots control everything. Lule. It's so effective at demonstrating that. And it really is a must play game for people who are interested in learning more about how this stuff actually plays out. I think if more people had taken this game and what it was trying to say to heart, there would have been a lot more backlash to what was going on in 2020, where the government was desperately trying to like tell you one thing about the pandemic when in reality it didn't actually exist. So again, Metal Gear Solid 2 is absolutely one of the most red-pilled games ever made. Anyone who knows me knows what I'm going to say as my number one entry, right? There is no denying this. There's no title that refutes transgenderism as thoroughly and absolutely as this one. Like, no game comes out and straight up calls homosexuality a sin like this game does, right? This game is pure 10 out of 10 Kino and really should be studied as just a peak of its genre. It was the most critically acclaimed game on Metacritic of all time for a while, outdoing The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time with a perfect score of 100. The House in Fata Morgana. An amazing story detailing the comings and goings of people who live in this house, the how they live their lives, how they die, their inevitable tragic fates, and it all builds up to absolute Kino. It is really a 10 out of 10 game. But in general, I do think the thing that really makes it stick out as like a red pilled entry is because of how it deals with gender issues and how it deals with romance. Because even though the game tries to mislead you at a certain point, it makes you think, it makes you question that maybe one of the characters is actually a homosexual and it's going through the motions. It's doing that thing where it's setting it up for the big twist and then you get something completely different and satisfying and compelling. And it makes so much more sense than the typical Hollywood cop-out ending of just be like, oh, and he was gay all along. It's like, no. This game really does an effective job of subverting your expectations and in a good way, right? Like this game really plays on the typical Western propaganda machine of expecting you to think that like something is going to turn super gay. Right? Like it really plays on that really, really effectively and leads to like a really just engaging situation. It's it's amazing. And I do think the way it's handled, it really demonstrates how all of the gender issues, all of the lies, the cope regarding homosexuality, how it's all just a pseudoscience and it has no real basis in reality at all. Because men are men and women are women, and they belong with each other, right? Men and women living together, creating babies. It that is the most red pilled thing of all.